200 a.m. over the Black Sea, when the horizon shimmered faintly unnoticed by radar, unheard by sonar. What began as a calm night around a Russian oil rig worth more than $500 million would soon become a spectacle of destruction and precision unseen in modern naval warfare. 2 Ukrainian Katran drones, low-slung and coated in radar-absorbent material, closed in at nearly 80 miles per hour. The operator inside the rig's control room, sipping coffee, had no idea that the most expensive minute of his life was about to begin. How did Ukraine turn the Black Sea, a once Russian-dominated arena, into a proving ground for high-tech sabotage? And what message was this strike sending to both NATO allies and Moscow's naval command? The operation was not an act of chance. It was a product of months of recalibration within Kiev's drone warfare units. Western defense analysts from Defense News and BBC security correspondents have noted that by late 2025, Ukraine's strategic shift had moved away from hitting isolated targets and toward crippling systems of influence communications, logistics, and energy lifelines. The Black Sea rigs had become the new battlefield, functioning as the digital eyes and ears of Russia's southern front. According to a Reuters briefing published days after the attack, these rigs weren't merely drilling platforms. They were surveillance hubs capable of disrupting GPS across hundreds of miles. NATO insiders quoted by Al Jazeera claimed that the rigs supported Russian fleet coordination from Crimea to Sochi, feeding real-time data into radar networks that complicated Ukrainian drone navigation. Knocking one out meant blinding a section of Moscow's command grid and exposing the vulnerability of its maritime shield. Ukraine's planners understood this perfectly. From a clandestine coastal site near Odessa, they launched the Katran drones under strict radio silence, each guided by an encrypted Starlink relay. Instead of flying directly, they hugged the shoreline following a curved flight path beneath the radar horizon, a maneuver Western experts later compared to U.S. stealth drone tactics used in the Persian Gulf. Meanwhile, deep underwater, a smaller Toloka drone moved like a phantom, emitting decoy sonar pulses to misdirect Russian sensors. At this stage, Ukraine's operational philosophy mirrored NATO's distributed lethality doctrine: small, autonomous assets, acting in concert to overwhelm superior firepower. The Katran's control systems, reportedly powered by a modified NVIDIA Jetson AI core, allowed it to navigate low-altitude turbulence without losing signal lock. Military analysts from DW later described the operation as a hybrid of human cunning and algorithmic warfare. Russia's defenses, however, appeared confident, even complacent. Their radars, including the Positive M early warning array, had a history of underperforming in high humidity conditions, a weakness Ukrainian engineers deliberately exploited. While the rig's jammers projected a false bubble of invincibility, the real storm was brewing just beyond their detection arc. By 1:42 a.m., the first sign of trouble flickered across the Russian radar, a single blip too faint to confirm. The operator dismissed it as wave interference. That dismissal sealed the rig's fate. Within minutes, the Ukrainian swarm's components had silently surrounded the rig, waiting for the command that would ignite a $500 million inferno and send shockwaves from Crimea to Geneva. And yet, for all its technical brilliance, the mission hinged on one extraordinary element, a ghost that didn't exist on any Russian map. A floating link hidden in plain sight would make the impossible connection between land and sea. Without it, the entire strike would collapse. What was this mysterious ghost, and how did Ukraine hide it beneath the watchful eyes of the Black Sea Fleet? The answer would redefine the limits of modern warfare. As the first faint radar blip disappeared into the night, the real enabler of Ukraine's strike emerged: a disguised cargo ship, silently slicing through the Black Sea's commercial lanes. This innocuous vessel carried what military analysts have since dubbed the ghost boat, a robotic relay platform that would bridge the vast distance between the coastal launch site and the distant oil rig. Days earlier, the ship had departed Romania, blending with ordinary maritime traffic, and now, under the cover of darkness, a crane gently lowered the robotic vessel into the water, invisible to both Russian satellites and fleet patrols. The strategic genius of this deployment did not go unnoticed in Western military circles. Defense specialists from Military Watch magazine described the system as a maritime equivalent of a wireless mesh network capable of extending Ukraine's operational reach hundreds of miles into Russian-controlled waters. By acting as a floating communications hub, the Ghost boat allowed the Katran drones and the Toloka submersible to maintain synchronization and respond to dynamic threats without being jammed by Russia's sophisticated electronic warfare systems. From Moscow's perspective, their calculations were perfect, at least on paper. The rig was considered a near impenetrable fortress, equipped with radar arrays, GPS jammers, and reinforced hulls, while the Black Sea Fleet remained safely in Novorossiysk. Yet no amount of armor or electronic shielding could account for a foe that combined AI-guided drones, decoy subs, and real-time data relays into a single coordinated strike. Experts from Al Jazeera highlighted that this hybrid tactic demonstrated a level of operational sophistication comparable to NATO's latest maritime exercises in the North Atlantic. Inside the Ghost boat, a network of Starlink-linked nodes enabled fiber optic communications between drones, bypassing traditional radio frequencies that could be intercepted or jammed. This configuration allowed Ukrainian commanders in Odessa to simultaneously monitor the rig's defenses and adjust attack vectors in real time. Western analysts emphasized that such technology blurred the line between conventional and cyber warfare, creating a new battlefield where microsecond decisions could determine victory or catastrophic loss. Yet even the Ghost boat had vulnerabilities. If detected, it would not only compromise the drone strike, but reveal Ukraine's evolving tactics to Moscow, potentially giving Russian engineers the chance to fortify remaining offshore assets. According to Reuters, Ukrainian strategists acknowledged this risk, but planned for contingencies, decoys, sacrificial drones, and precise timing ensured that the Ghost boat's presence remained a secret until the moment of engagement. As the vessel crept within 30 miles of the target, the Katran drones traced parallel paths above the waves, staying beneath the radar horizon. The Toloka submersible, meanwhile, advanced silently at periscope depth, masking its thermal signature behind natural wave patterns. Observers later noted that this multi-domain approach, air surface and subsurface, confounded even the most sophisticated detection systems, turning the rig into a blind fortress. At this critical juncture, the success of the operation relied entirely on coordination. Drones could not act independently, and the Ghost boat could not falter. NATO analysts reviewing satellite imagery noted the precision the approach mimicked Western stealth insertion drills, yet was executed without a single conventional vessel in proximity to the Russian fleet. The question facing viewers now becomes urgent. How can a $500 million fortress be rendered virtually invisible through a combination of ingenuity, robotics, and AI? The answer lay in the delicate choreography of the Ghost boat and its airborne companions, a silent dance that would soon trigger the Russian defensive machinery into a catastrophic overreaction. What happens when the illusion is finally pierced and the Russian defenders realize the threat is already inside their perimeter? The stakes, as Ukraine had planned, were about to skyrocket. At 1:43 a.m., the first ripple of chaos swept across the rig's radar screens. A faint blip appeared on the positive M array, so subtle that the operators initially dismissed it as a wave reflection. But in reality, it was the deliberate bait, a single FPV drone lifted from the Katran's hatch, climbing slowly into the night sky as a calculated lure. The inbound Tor M2 missile programmed to track thermal signatures had to make a choice: chase the visible flare or continue targeting the ghost boat network below. The missile veered, striking the decoy, producing a brilliant flash that illuminated the rig's blind confidence. Western military experts immediately recognized the brilliance of this move. According to a defense news analysis, it was a textbook demonstration of misdirection, forcing the defender to commit resources to a false threat, while the real attack unfolded unseen. The Russians were now aware of drones in the area, but they had no idea how many or from which direction the main strike would come. As one retired U.S. Navy strategist told NYT, "It's the difference between fighting shadows and fighting ghosts. Ukraine forced them to battle their own assumptions." The alarm at Novorossiysk Air Base screamed. Pilots sprinted to Su-30SM fighter jets, preparing to intercept what they assumed was the full Ukrainian strike. But Ukraine had anticipated detection. The Katran deployed a sophisticated electronic warfare attack, flooding the X-band radar with digital noise. Screens turned from tactical clarity to a blinding wall of white, giving the drones a precious 30-second window to initiate the main assault. Within that interval, 4 FPV drones detached from the Katran, tethered via fiber optic cables, immune to jamming, and relayed through the ghost boat's Starlink link. Flying perpendicular to the rig, their signals blended seamlessly with the waves below. Meanwhile, the Toloka drone prepared its underwater strike, rising slowly to periscope depth. Each step was timed to maximize disruption while minimizing exposure. Analysts from Al Jazeera and DW later highlighted that this orchestration exemplified a new paradigm in hybrid warfare, a multi-domain operation that simultaneously exploited electronic, cyber, aerial, and maritime vulnerabilities. The Russians' radar coverage, while technically sophisticated, had never been tested against a layered, coordinated, AI-enabled strike. NATO observers noted that the method mirrored principles they teach in exercises attack, decoy, and overwhelm, but few imagined it would be executed in the Black Sea with such precision. Russia's corvette Bayan M, 12 miles away, detected the Toloka's sonar pings, but could not differentiate them from the decoys. The ship's crew attempted a countermeasure, launching sonar-guided missiles, but these attacks targeted illusions. Every reaction Ukraine had predicted in advance, converting Russian confidence into tactical error. According to Western military commentators, this was an operation designed not merely to destroy a target, but to erode decision-making under stress, an asymmetric strategy that left Moscow reacting blindly to a threat it could not fully perceive. The psychological element was equally critical. The blinding radar decoy flares and ghost signals forced Russian operators into a cognitive trap: act decisively and risk a mistake, or hesitate and concede control. In military terms, Ukraine had seized OODA loops: observe, orient, decide, act, turning Russian doctrine against itself. The mini cliffhanger with the Su-30SM jets only minutes away, the rig remained blind, the Toloka exposed, and the drones poised to strike the next seconds would determine whether Ukraine's calculated illusion would culminate in irreversible destruction or catastrophic detection. Could such a perfect illusion survive the arrival of Russia's most lethal interceptors? The answer would redefine the meaning of modern maritime strike operations. By 1:45 a.m., the Su-30SM fighters were 14 minutes from the target zone, their radars slicing through the darkness with precision unmatched by the rig's own systems. Yet Ukraine had anticipated this moment with chilling accuracy. The Katran, now fully exposed, became a calculated sacrifice, a lure designed to draw attention away from the FPV swarm and Toloka submersible. Hyper-intense thermal decoys were deployed, burning hotter than the Katran's own engine, presenting a tempting target for heat-seeking missiles. As one defense news analyst later noted, the Katran became a living honeypot, converting vulnerability into an offensive advantage. The Russian pilots, trained to prioritize heat signatures and follow predictable trajectories, were now chasing phantoms. Every missile fired at the decoy allowed the FPVs to close in on their actual targets, the rig's GPS spoofer and communications antennas. In tandem, the Toloka had maneuvered silently beneath the waves, awaiting the perfect moment to strike the rig's submerged support structures. This multi-domain misdirection exemplified the strategic innovation that Western experts had warned could redefine Black Sea dynamics. The stakes were enormous. The rig was not only an energy node, but also a critical component of Russia's artillery guidance network. According to Reuters reporting on October 2025, Black Sea operations losing this platform meant that Russian smart shells suddenly became unreliable, dramatically reducing their accuracy and forcing Moscow to rethink its coastal defense posture. From a NATO perspective, this strike signaled both a vulnerability in Russian integrated defenses and the potential for Kiev to exploit those gaps in a coordinated campaign that could ripple across the southern flank. Ukraine's calculated sacrifice extended to the drone operators themselves. Each FPV was tiny, expendable, and designed for surgical strikes. Their deployment required nerves of steel, given that any capture would reveal operational doctrine. Yet this was the crux of Ukraine's approach, integrating risk, deception, and precision to create systemic paralysis rather than isolated damage. Analysts from Al Jazeera emphasized that this method turned traditional attritional engagements on their head, demonstrating how low-cost autonomous systems could neutralize high-value assets without direct confrontation. As the first FPVs streaked toward their targets, the Toloka executed its synchronized attack. A 10-pound mini-torpedo struck one of the rig's concrete legs, exploiting prior structural weaknesses inflicted during rehearsals. The resulting shockwave sent churning bubbles and concrete debris through the water, creating acoustic confusion and temporarily blinding Russian sonar systems aboard the Bayan M corvette. With sensors overwhelmed, the corvette could only circle helplessly, unable to mount an effective counterstrike. Observers from Military Watch magazine described this as a textbook example of multi-domain saturation. By combining visual thermal and acoustic deception, Ukraine forced Russian commanders into a decision trap, with no correct choice. Every defensive move initiated by Moscow was anticipated and countered, underscoring the strategic importance of integrating AI drones and real-time communications. The mini cliffhanger with the Katran sacrificed and the FPV swarm closing on the rig's primary systems, the Toloka lurking beneath, and Russian interceptors still approaching the operation, had reached its most perilous moment. Any misstep could expose Ukraine's entire playbook, yet the plan was designed to turn exposure into an advantage. Will the combined assault of drones and submersibles succeed in toppling the rig before the full Russian response can materialize? The answer would determine not only the fate of a $500 million target, but the future of drone-centric maritime warfare. Could a coordinated strike beneath the waves finish what the sky had started? In the cold pre-dawn, the answer arrived not with a thunderclap, but as a measured pulse, the Toloka underwater drone executing the final decisive act that would turn targeted sabotage into structural collapse. Ukraine's multi-domain choreography became lethal when the underwater element hit the rig's already weakened concrete leg, triggering a chain reaction of failures that no surface crew could mend. From Kiev's perspective, this was the culmination of a months-long campaign to erode the energy backbone of Russia's southern operations, a campaign that by mid-October 2025, Western analysts said had intensified sharply, with dozens of strikes on refineries, terminals, and logistics nodes to choke Moscow's fuel and export capacity. The Black Sea operation was never merely a local raid. It was part of a strategy to impose systemic costs on Russia's military logistics and to force recalculations in Kremlin planning. The Toloka's 10-pound torpedo did what dozens of missiles could not. It exploited a brittle point underwater where repair is slow, dangerous, and visibility is near zero. The first impact fractured concrete, the second amplified internal shock waves, and the third timed to coincide with FPV strikes on the rig's comms and GPS spoofing towers delivered a catastrophic structural failure. The platform sheared rupturing pipes and spilling crude that ignited in seconds when severed power lines sparked. The result was an inferno that turned $500 million of industrial kit into a floating tomb. Satellite analysts and energy market watchers noted the immediate knock-on effects. Tanker routes and port timelines shifted as insurers repriced risks across the western Black Sea. Novorossiysk and other export hubs saw renewed pressure and congestion that analysts said could push export costs and transit premiums higher in the coming weeks. The destruction of a single rig produced ripple effects, refining throughput that had already been damaged by earlier attacks, faltered further, and short-term fuel bottlenecks grew more likely in occupied regions, an economic squeeze that Ukraine's strategists had calculated into their campaign. Military commentators emphasized that the strike's technical elements, an AI-assisted Katran mothership coordinating FPV swarms, and a Toloka submersible performing precise standoff strikes, were not anomalies, but emerging warfare trends. The Katran platform's extended-range coordination modular payloads and long-endurance loitering have been highlighted by defense tech observers as a force multiplier in littoral contests. Meanwhile, Toloka-style submersibles are being showcased as instruments capable of altering maritime risk calculus far beyond traditional mine or torpedo tactics, prompting naval thinkers to reassess anti-submarine nets and harbor defenses. Strategically, the hit exposed an uncomfortable fact for Moscow and a difficult question for NATO planners: how to deter or defend against low-cost distributed systems that can reach strategic value targets without sending conventionally sized forces into harm's way. US and NATO staff already tracking the escalating campaign flagged the need for layered maritime surveillance and resilient coastal infrastructure recommendations that will likely accelerate Allied investment in counter-drone technologies and undersea detection. With Donald Trump in the White House, Washington's policy calculus includes both expedited arms transfers and political signaling. NATO's role remains to strengthen collective resilience while avoiding escalation into direct confrontation. On the ground, or rather on the water, the human toll was immediate. Dozens of rig workers and security personnel were incapacitated or lost, and a quarantine enforced by Russian fast boats could not hide the glaring fact captured by commercial satellites: a thermal scar where an industrial giant had stood. The broader effect was psychological as well as material. The strike punctured the aura of maritime invulnerability and suggested that future hits could target the logistic arteries that sustain campaigns far from the front lines. As smoke rose and markets recalculated, one question loomed for both Kyiv and its Western partners: could a sustained campaign against energy infrastructure force strategic shifts in Moscow's posture? Or would it merely harden Russia's defensive investments and lead to deeper escalation? The next moves in ports, in insurance markets, and in NATO boardrooms would reveal whether the Black Sea had merely opened a new front or had changed the rules of maritime warfare forever. By 1:48 a.m., the operation had reached its climax. The FPV drones streaked across the night sky, their laser designators locking onto targets the size of dinner plates. 2 drones hit the rig's primary communications array, while 2 more disabled the GPS spoofer shielding Russian forces. Simultaneously, the Toloka fired its 3rd torpedo at the already weakened concrete leg, delivering a final shock that caused catastrophic structural failure. Within minutes, a $500 million rig became an inferno, its collapse reverberating far beyond the Black Sea. Western experts quickly noted the cascading implications. According to Military Watch magazine, the loss of the rig instantly degraded Russian artillery precision across southern Ukraine. Smart shells reliant on GPS guidance became ineffective, granting Ukrainian forces a freer operational environment. Insurance companies reassessed risk in the western Black Sea, with shipping premiums spiking as vessels rerouted to avoid potential conflict zones. The strike revealed a new reality. Even fortified infrastructure could no longer be taken for granted in a theater dominated by advanced drone warfare. NATO analysts emphasized that the attack had a dual strategic effect. Militarily, it exposed critical gaps in Russia's integrated defense systems, highlighting vulnerabilities in electronic warfare, radar coverage, and fleet deployment. Economically, it disrupted energy flow and port logistics, reinforcing Ukraine's strategy of leveraging energy infrastructure as a force multiplier. Sources at Al Jazeera and Reuters highlighted that the psychological impact on Russian command structures was equally significant. Paranoia began to ripple through the Black Sea fleet, already relegated to passive positions, eroding confidence in previously invulnerable maritime assets. The broader geopolitical implications were equally sobering. Russia's retreat from exposed positions, combined with global energy market reactions, provided NATO countries with an operational intelligence advantage. Experts from Defense News noted that the strike demonstrated the efficacy of combining low-cost autonomous systems with high-level strategic planning, suggesting that the era of unchecked maritime dominance by conventional fleets may be ending. The Black Sea, once a symbol of Russian power, now served as a testing ground for asymmetric warfare techniques that could influence other contested maritime regions worldwide. The human and material toll was immediate. 25 Russian operators and security personnel were neutralized. The Bayan M corvette, rendered temporarily blind by underwater shockwaves, could only circle helplessly. Spetsnaz fast boats arrived from Crimea, but their intervention was limited to quarantine enforcement. Commercial satellites documented the aftermath: a 20-foot-wide thermal scar where the rig once stood, and an unmistakable message about the reach and precision of Ukrainian forces. For Ukraine, the operation represented more than a single tactical victory. It was a demonstration of capability, ingenuity, and the potential of drone warfare to reshape conventional maritime strategy. Analysts noted that the combined use of airborne FPVs, AI-assisted mothership drones, and stealthy submersibles could serve as a blueprint for future engagements, both in regional theaters and in high-stakes global confrontations. As viewers reflect on this unprecedented strike, the final question emerges: which was more decisive, the Trojan horse cargo ship that enabled the ghost boat, or the sacrificial Katran drone that drew enemy fire? This operation not only reshaped the Black Sea's tactical landscape, but also posed a challenge to traditional military assumptions, signaling a future where asymmetric precision can redefine power in ways conventional forces cannot anticipate.